We got to take it seriously. Saul, right? Just like Saul, we can miss the vineyard that God has given us. God had literally made Saul king over Israel. We can miss the vineyard that God has given us and bloom where we're planted. We can miss the opportunity to bloom where we're planted because we are trying to look over into somebody else's vineyard and thinking, why isn't mine like this? Or why isn't mine like that? Or why don't I have this? Or why isn't my life like that? It is a mistake every time. Let's keep our eyes on our prize, not somebody else's. Let's keep our eyes on the mission that God has given us, on our family, on our career, on our friendships, on our godliness, rather than what somebody else is doing. Second thing, I'm going to try to roll through these. The fruit of discontent. The fruit of discontent. When we chase what we don't need. Remember 1 Timothy 6:6. But godliness with contentment is great gain. How do we learn to be content? Well, one way we learn to be content is we stop defining ourselves by what other people think of us. And you're like, yeah, Nick, great idea. I never thought of that. But the truth is, every one of us needs these reminders, including me. Every one of us, that other people don't define you. Other people don't define me. I love, and I used this book last week, Tony Rinke's book, 12 Ways Your Smartphone is Changing You. And he says on a little riff on French philosopher Descartes, I am light, therefore I am. So often, right, we let whether somebody else likes us or approves of us define our happiness, determine our happiness. And things like smartphones and social media, man, for younger generations and older now, it affects everybody in varying ways. It amplifies your hunger for instant validation, for likes and for shares and for applause. Again, we've all wrestled with it, including me. It is that temptation, it really speaks directly to that human temptation to seek human approval over God's approval. Now, if I asked you all, if I said, whose approval do you value more? People or God's? Every one of you would say, oh no, I approve God's. I want God's approval. That's what I want. But then if we examine just 1 week of your life, what do you think we'd see? What do you think God would see? And so this isn't a question meant to sort of like beat you down or anything. This is a question meant to awaken us. Galatians 1:10 is a wake-up call. Paul said, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? How am I living my life? Technology will feed your pride and your insecurity. We'll start finding ourselves in our identity in a screen instead of in Christ where it belongs. And comparison doesn't just stop at envy. It becomes discontent like we saw with Saul, and man, it can wreck us. We look around and suddenly what I have isn't enough. I was pretty happy until I started looking over there. And then I see something I don't have and I feel lacking. And if I don't get that, then I can't be happy. Let's talk about Lisa's story. We're going to call her Lisa. Lisa loved her cozy little house. Just a small little house, beautiful little house. Until she started following all the home decor influencers online. And suddenly, her mismatched furniture that had been hand-me-downs from family, they stopped being cute and started feeling embarrassing. She'd scroll on the internet or she'd look at Pinterest. She dreamed of a renovation that she couldn't afford. And what had been gratitude turned into grumbling. Technology didn't just show her ideas, it sowed dissatisfaction. And that brings us back to Saul and David's example. We just looked at one example. You could use a lot of different ones to illustrate this challenge. Saul's discontent didn't just make him jealous. It drove him to obsession with the wrong thing. Drove him to obsession with being angry with David, so much so that he literally wanted to kill him. You might say, well, Nick, there's nobody I feel like that about. I don't want to kill anybody. But how often have you talked junk about somebody or gossiped about somebody or been angry at somebody or expressed anger at somebody else or said something bad about somebody else because of jealousy, because of something they did that you didn't? Most of us, not most of us, everybody in here has done that, and every one of us would be ashamed if others knew some of the depths that we had sunk to in those weakest moments of our lives. I'll say again, I don't tell you that to beat you down. I say it again to remind you of how much we must actively pursue God's approval rather than man's, because if we don't, it is leading us nowhere good. Technology will disciple your discontent. That's what technology far too often does. It'll have you chasing things God didn't mean for you to have because you see somebody else has them. And what you will miss, brothers and sisters, listen, what you will miss in that far too often is what God has for you. You're looking at what somebody else has, and you think you don't have it, and all the while you're taking your eyes off what God has given you, what God means for you to do, where God has you planted that, listen, look right at me. He doesn't have anybody else in the world planted where you are.